we have Mr. Raphael, a Cointelegraph senior researcher who has been working in researching the GameFi space lately. And I don't want to give away too much info. I don't know how much you could share, but I know you have something really, really cool coming out in a couple of days. So really excited to get to chat about that and to get to chat with you. So first of all, thank you for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Ben. Really excited to be part of this show and looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think everybody knows, what Cointelegraph is. Definitely a media powerhouse, a leading authority in the crypto space, the blockchain space. And so I would love to understand before we dive into, and we kind of talked about doing almost like a GameFi crypto gaming state of the union of like where we really are today on the episode. But before we get to that, I would love to really understand more about your story. Like, how did you get here? How did you get to this position? Where you're like a leading authority on this information. How'd you really get to where you are today?
So I'll keep it really short because I think it's really about the subject more than me. But I came in touch with Bitcoin in 2013, where we started to develop mining hardware in Austria. And that didn't go too far because at that time we were seeking investors to catch up with Avalon Labs, who was at that time the leading mining manufacturer. And like we got totally laughed out of the room by possible investors who were like, "You want me to invest 100,000 euros into this mathematic currency, game currency? Are you stupid? Leave."
Biggest mistake of their lives.
In hindsight, definitely, yeah. But they were pretty sure of themselves at that point. So then I just kind of kept in touch with the space, bought some Bitcoin, sold some Bitcoin, was part of purchasing Ether and using it for the DAO when that hack happened. So that was exciting. And then in 2017, I started to go in full time into crypto. We actually ran a Bitcoin hard fork at that point and did some research into fractional reserve cryptocurrencies. And from then, I started to work for the Swiss company numbers.com, who's doing a self-custodial Bitcoin account, and then started to work with Demelza Hayes, who's the lead researcher for crypto for Cointelegraph. And that's how I got into Cointelegraph and started working with them.
Amazing. So how did you then, out of all the areas of crypto to really focus your research on, how did you really come to the point where you wanted to focus on the GameFi space?
So I've been watching the NFT space pretty closely in 2020 and 21. And I was really excited about that and saw like what was happening. And I can think of a ton of different uses for NFTs. And around that time, I got the first look at Axie. And then in 2021, that kind of exploded, and it was really blowing my mind because I like it caught me totally unaware. I was kind of aware of the project, but I totally didn't see that potential. And in hindsight, of course, it was obvious and really well executed. But that like piqued my interest, and that was when the Demelza asked about like what kind of topics we want to focus on. Like my three nominations were games, DAOs, and the third, I think, were stablecoins. And then, so we did games first. It was me and Brian O'Shea and Helen Rosenberg, and some data issues from Alexander Valentin, who is like the data wizard of the team and helped us with charts and researching, balances on different games and on different blockchains. And as we dove into that, we were like looking for, okay, we didn't just want to document the space, although that's interesting in itself, but we wanted to have like a clear takeaway, like something that readers can really take home And that's in a way surprising, also like a surprising insight. And the more we researched, the clearer it became that what differentiates blockchain games from games before is that blockchains are or bring as part of the technical repertoire that they contain is they bring economic building blocks to games. Because before, if you developed a game and you wanted to have a in-game marketplace for game materials or for characters, you had to develop the currency, the transactions, and all these things, and make them secure and have a price setting mechanism and so on and so forth. And that's a lot of development effort that's orthogonal to developing a game, where you're actually focusing on the content and developing fun gameplay and like a good story and graphics and all that. And the economic side is something totally different. But when you add blockchains to a game, you get all of these building blocks basically, I mean, for free is not correct, but for very cheap. Because if you know some solidity, you know that you can spin up an ERC20 token in like half an hour, Open Zeppelin library, and you're good to go. And it'll be a good token. And you have released it on Ethereum, and there you are. And that's in a way what happened with Axie and these games, is that they chose to use blockchains to offer users these mechanisms that come so easy with blockchains, but were so hard to develop before. And the reason that's important is that we have seen trading of in-game materials with other games before. For instance, World of Warcraft, there was some like magic wand or sword that sold for $10,000 on eBay. But this transaction is really costly for the seller, because I have to find that item. Okay, that's the same in both games. But then I have to put it on eBay, wait 7 days, the auction finishes, and then I actually have no mechanism to transfer it in the game for money. So I have to make sure I receive these funds on another platform. There's a trust issue, because let's say I receive the funds first, will the seller trust me, and so on and so forth. So there's a host of issues that actually, from an economic perspective, are just transaction costs. They add friction to the transaction and make the transaction more costly. And with blockchain games, this completely goes out of the window, because it's all inside of the game and it's super smooth. You can list it on the marketplace, you sell it, you receive the crypto, the smart contract transfers the NFT, and it's like super clean, no? Easy to do. And on the other side of the equation, you also have open standards, because Axie and other games use NFTs, and they used ERC 721 compliant specifications. So all of a sudden, you can take these virtual items out of the game and sell it on third-party marketplaces like OpenSea. And that's fascinating, because the minute you do that, these assets become a lot less virtual, because they retain utility even outside of the game world, which is amazing. There's no other way to do that except with these interoperable blockchain worlds and open standards and property rights, because all of a sudden, I, as a player who has these characters and who has these in-game materials, I have control over these items that I didn't have before, because I can take it out of the game.
Whereas previously, in something like a World of Warcraft, to continue with that example, it is very hard if you spend a lot of time and energy leveling up your character, building out your war chest of gold, acquiring a bunch of items. They could take that away from you at any time. And even if you did try to do the eBay route, they could ban you. I mean, they could take away your account and then you lose everything. And so
Yeah.
all that work is for naught. So it's really not even that valuable. It has some value, but like you said, the costs just eat away at that value. Yeah, that's fascinating. Do you think that's the most important like maybe we could get into to understanding like what role this idea plays in the greater understanding of all the innovations of the crypto gaming space and where we really stand. Is this the most important piece? Is this where the most value is? Is this ownership piece? Or is this one piece of a bigger story?
That's a great question. For me, this is the most important improvement that blockchains bring to the crypto gaming space. And the reason why I see it that way is that I'm sure you've heard it before that in some sense a blockchain is just a database with really poor performance, right?
Right.
So clearly, from this technical side, there's very little that blockchains have to offer to games because, especially with faster games and fast gameplay, you have really high performance requirements, and blockchains can't deliver there. So here, suddenly the development even becomes a little bit harder. But on the other hand, what they can offer you is these kind of economic building blocks, like making a in-game currency very easy or making storing in-game materials very easy to develop. So I think the strong side or the strength that blockchains have to offer is really in that realm of economics and ownership.
So I want to kind of go towards this idea of doing like the state of the union type of thing.
Mhm.
I know we kind of jumped down into it, and we got to possibly the most important part of it right at the get go. But maybe help us understand, for somebody who may be their crypto gaming is on their radar, the metaverse is on their radar, but they don't really have a super strong grasp of like, okay, well, what does the ecosystem look like? What does the landscape look like? And how can I really understand this and process this in my brain in a really elegant and organized way, because there's so much going on out there.
Yeah.
Like, how do people organize this in their minds? And maybe we could do that in like a state of the union of like, where are we right now with GameFi, with crypto gaming? What's actually going on there in the marketplace?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Super good. Um, so I think one big obstacle to like understanding it all is that it's so much in flux and developing. So it's really hard to say where this space is going to be 1 year from now. And I kind of stopped making predictions because in a way it's like, I can also flip a coin and it'll have the same accuracy. I mean, really,
So true.
yeah. But we can get into like where we are now, and like we have seen um, I'd say three main routes that game developers choose to embark on. And one is games that are actually, like I'd say, totally economics focused, like DeFi Kingdom. And in DeFi Kingdom, it was a way to visualize your liquidity position. So just maybe for listeners who aren't so versed in decentralized finance, a liquidity position is when you basically loan a certain amount of your funds to a decentralized exchange in return for some yield, for some interest that you get on this position. And DeFi Kingdom started out as a way to visualize that in a beautiful sense with gardens and flowers, and then built an interesting gameplay on top where you can earn in-game currency called jewels for performance in this game. But the main object of the game is still this economic thing of DeFi yields, right?
That's right. It's kind of like DeFi. It's like visually rendered DeFi.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it. Exactly. Yeah. And then you have a game like Axie, where you have a lot of gameplay with breeding characters, racing characters, of characters fighting each other in these arena fights. And all the characters are also NFTs, so you can take them out of the game, trade them. There's an in-game currency that you need to breed. So there's an economic element, but there's also like a gameplay element. And other games are, for instance, I think when you look at something like Splinterlands, I think that's also probably in the category of Axie, where you have all these NFTs, but basically it's a card game like Magic the Gathering, and so you have that. And I think going forward, there will be more games where the gameplay is really front and center, and the economics are just there in the back to like have one more avenue to create value for users. And I think this is a really important point, that in a way it's a big shift from game developers kind of extracting value from users, like, okay, what can we charge them for, to creating more and more value for users. And by creating value for users, you just need to like take off a certain percentage, and the more value users create for themselves, you also earn. And it's like a really good self-reinforcing circle where everybody earns and earns. And I think that's a beautiful thing. It's like, it's great to see that shift where away from seeing users just as a source of income to seeing something as an ecosystem that's meant to grow and reach everybody who's participating. And that's fantastic.
I completely agree. And I actually think what it does in an interesting way is it realigns the incentives to where it feels like everybody's on the same team now. Because instead, just like you said, instead of games trying to extract value from users, now games are focused on trying to help users create as much value as possible together by the games building the framework and the sandbox for the users to then play in. And I realized that was a confusing analogy because there is another thing called sandbox, but like the like building the playground that the users can then play in and earn in, and that is really really interesting. So can you give us a couple more examples of different games that you think are doing a really good job in those three different categories, and are kind of the leaders and are are really just performing well, doing what they need to be doing? Maybe just to give some people just a good jumping off point to continue doing their research as like a launch pad, so we can have just a few more names of like, okay, these are good types of games that we can kind of compartmentalize in this one type of game, and then we can go and do research more in those areas.
Of course, of course. Like, we picked 5 blockchain games that we kind of compared. And one is Alien Worlds, which is also like an NFT DeFi focused game, doing really well, had more than 40 million locked up in balances in January already, and growing quite fast. We mentioned X Infinity, which is still going strong and actually developing more and more use cases and expanding the gameplay. So definitely still worth watching, even though it's one of the older participants in this game. Then there's Bomb Crypto, which I liked a lot because it like reminds me of these kind of 80s and 90s games that I played on my Amiga 500 when I had that, and it's like amazing. And Bomb Crypto is like you have these characters that kind of install and diffuse bombs, and you have certain traits of the character that you can then level up in return for using in-game currency. And then when you clear maps of bombs, then you also earn. So there's an economic element. DeFi Kingdoms we also touched, and Splinterlands is this card game. So these were the 5 games that we looked at in the report, and we analyzed them in terms of active users. And here we have seen some interesting developments, that most games have the kind of parabolic user growth, and then they kind of plateau and stay on a certain user base. And then we analyzed the volume of transactions, like how much economic activity is there. And the interesting thing is that even as user growth plateaus, volume still tends to accelerate. So more users are doing more, even the same amount of users are doing more and more transactions, or doing transactions for more value. And then we analyzed the games in terms of balance, like how much money is locked into these games. And this is, of course, coupled with the in-game currency. So as the in-game currency becomes more and more valuable, the balance locked growth grows at the same time. Yeah, I think that's the 5 games that we analyzed for the report.
Yeah, that's interesting. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what we can learn as far as the various assets within the games, because what I've noticed is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but there are kind of 3 different types of assets that are that you could participate in from the economic side of the game. There's typically like the governance token, like for example, in the Axie's case, there's their AXS token. Then there's the in-game token or Axie's SLP token. And then there are various types of NFTs that are, are non-fungible tokens. So being the Axie, and then for other games, there's kind of the characters, and then there's like the land, and then there are accessories to the character. And so for the games that are really doing the best and that are really kind of leading the space here, what are they doing right when it comes to building their economies and having multiple different types of tokens, whether it be fungible, non-fungible, and what are they still trying to fix? What obstacles are they still facing in regards to their economies?
Okay, good. I think you touched upon the main points. I think here the game category kind of gets expanded or even left at some points, because if you look, for instance, at Decentraland, is this still a game? I mean, there's like really big corporations buying Decentraland, putting up billboards or developing showrooms for their products in this virtual world. So is it still a game or is it not? And it gets a little bit blurry there. But I think when you have virtual worlds, land is a big thing to offer to users, as are accessories to characters by themselves, ways to level up characters, and so on. I think in the long run, the games do well that give users more and more opportunities to grow, and more ways to play, like to make that keep the game interesting. Because let's say Xe wouldn't have evolved, and you still can only raise the characters and they can fight in an arena, but there wouldn't be any land sales or land development, then users would get bored and then they drop off and go to another platform. So I think that's important. And regarding the challenges, a lot of these games are called play to earn games, because like you play and you complete certain challenges, and in return for the challenges you get like the in-game token. And at some point, especially with Axie, that was clearly visible, the in-game token was valued so highly that new participants suddenly had a hard time to even enter the game, because you need 3 Axie characters to start playing. And when each character is maybe €1,000, then you saw all of a sudden you need €3,000 or $3,600 to even start playing. And then the play to earn economy becomes a have to earn economy, which I think is the opposite of what you want in a game, because you want like people having an easy time accessing the game, starting to play, and then if they earn, good. And actually kind of started to develop a solution with these scholarships where people who had a lot of access rented them out to other players who couldn't afford them for a fee. But this became rather murky because sometimes the rental fees were really exorbitant, or were rent out for cheap, but like all of the earnings had to be, or a big chunk of the earnings had to be paid to the guy, to the person renting out the characters. And so I think that's something that game developers really have to be aware of. Like, how inclusive is the game? How easy is it to get started? Like, because of course, in the beginning, when everything grows and everybody gets rich, like it's amazing. But what's the long term strategy? Like, where do you want to be in 5 years, and how do you get there? And that's a lot harder, I think. And I think we have seen a lot of games that were like really get rich quick schemes, and just kind of try to draw in as many people as possible and hype the token, and then kind of crash and burn. So I think that's a big issue, because it gives the whole space a kind of scammy, side
Bad
note,
rep, bad
bad
reputation.
reputation. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's unfortunate. Yeah, I'm. That's exactly what I'm seeing too. Is the games that are able to keep building out new content, keep creating new assets. They have the land, they have different accessories, they have different characters, they have multiple entrant sinks and sources of ways to allow the sources of new value coming into the ecosystem, sources of value, or sinks where value can leave the ecosystem. Um, those games are very healthy, especially when they can kind of dial those knobs and adjust that as needed. Um, and specifically, what I'm talking about there is, making sure that if you have different types of, like you have your in-game currency, well, you have to have a stable price on that currency in order for it to, over the long term, have real value and to be able to hold value. Because, yeah, everybody can earn 10 trillion, CGI points, but if those are worth, approaching zero, then it doesn't matter how many you have. It's still all approaching zero very quickly. And so you have to not only have ways to earn and to get the currencies and get the assets into people's hands, but then you need a good way for those currencies to also be, like, you need good demand for those currencies. Like, there needs to be a reason for them to exist, and a way to plug them back into the ecosystem. And some of the games that I'm seeing that are doing that really well are the ones that are requiring the in-game token to be used for upgrades, for example, to get stronger weapons, to make you more viable within the game, and to help you upgrade and progress through the game, and things like that. But adding different elements like that, it makes the game more fun. It makes the economy more stable and sustainable long term. But I absolutely think you're right. Taking that long term approach, I mean, it's critical. It's hypercritical. And unfortunately, we do have some bad actors that have come in and given us a bad rep. And some of the gamers that I know from the legacy gaming world of not Web3, I talk with them all the time, and they have a lot of very valid concerns. I'm like, hey, I'll be the first one to say those are very valid concerns. We need to work together as a community to solve those. Um, anyways, I want to kind of continue on here. I would love to dive in and understand more about the this idea of adding in different, like adding in new content, adding in new assets, and maybe we could start with the land, and understanding, like, what do you see as one of the main value drivers for the land NFTs? Because a lot of people ask me all the time, like, why is why is that land going to be going to be valuable? Should I buy land? Where should I go buy land? Which game or world should I buy land in? And so maybe we could just kind of touch on, like, the role that plays and understanding that a little bit more?
Super good question. I think one point that you touched on is really important here, and that is this kind of openness that you mentioned. That's so important because this is especially true with land. And I think really with virtual land, it's very similar to buying land on the real estate market. Like, what would you pay for a piece of land where you know you would never be able to build a house there because of some zoning permits or something, and there's a toxic river flowing through it, and by the way, 3 times a year there's a locust pest coming by, versus a nice piece of newly developed building land at the Hong Kong waterfront. I mean, you know, it's kind of
Important
yeah.
distinctions.
So I think that's exactly the same, that you need to ask the questions that you need to ask yourself before buying virtual land. Like, what's the outlook on this piece of land? How will it, like, what kind of ways to make that land valuable are available now, and what have been proposed or are in development? And we have seen with Decentraland that they did an amazing job of creating value that's possible on top of that land. And that's why I think when Facebook announced their Meta rebrand, that Decentraland picked up so much value, was totally justified because it's a great project. It's been around a while. It's working. That they've really like learned their lessons in the years that they exist, and I think they're on a really good path. And so I think this ties into a broader question for NFTs, is like, how can NFTs stay valuable? Because like not every NFT is a CryptoPunk. Like CryptoPunk was this once in a decade project, like the very first, and for some reason these 64 by 64 JPEGs have been discovered as these iconic landmarks of digital art and appreciate in value. That's not going to happen for like 99% of profile picture projects out there. I'm 100% sure, unless you find a way to keep these NFTs accruing value and function in some form. And I think as long as you can't expand the functionality of these NFTs and bring those NFTs into virtual worlds where they can perform certain things, these values will go to zero, absolutely, because people will just lose interest. Like, let's say I bought a mighty baby dragon a year ago, and yeah, the people threw it out. I like the artwork, it's nice, but where is that going? And the answer is probably nowhere. While on the other hand, if you look at a project like Bored Ape Yacht Club, where they just incredible value adds, and often, like every half a year or so, they bring out this amazing new way where you can use your NFT. And clearly, this adds value to the project and keeps it top of the mind of investors, which again reflects on the price. So I think this openness is really central. And when buying land, you have to look at the project, like how long does it exist? Probably, I think this is a distinction. What's the roadmap like? What are the developers like? What did they do before? I think there's considerable research to be made, especially since a lot of the land is actually quite expensive. Like there's frequently a price tag of 1 ETH, 2 ETH, something like that. So that's a decent chunk of money. And I think you do well to sit down and really do the research about what's possible with this land, and then come to a conclusion if you want to buy it or not.
Absolutely. And just to kind of go more into like the function of the land, I think a lot of people are just trying to wrap their heads around, okay, well, what is actually possible with it? So, just off the top of my head, maybe you buy land that becomes the metaverse equivalent of New York City, downtown New York City. Maybe you rent out part of your land to an in-game blacksmith who wants to create weapons and sell their wares to all the people that walk by your parcel of land. So there's an economic value to that vendor. Maybe you rent out your land to somebody like JP Morgan just entered the metaverse and bought some land. So maybe the next humongous corporation that wants to come in, maybe they don't want to buy, maybe they want to rent from you, and so you can rent that out. Or maybe you rent it to some shop owner in the metaverse who wants to open up a shop or something. I don't know. There's so many things that could be done with it. What are some other use cases that you've identified of like, okay, well, this could be some really valuable function that is added to land, or that land can take advantage, the landowners can take advantage of, to bring more value to the land, or make it worth their while to purchase it in the first place.
So one thing I've seen, I think that was with Remark, which is so spelled RMRK, and it's an application to build NFTs on Kusama, and I think now the also Polkadot. And they have this amazing technology of nested NFTs. So like an NFT can actually own another NFT. And they had this showcase of virtual land where somebody bought the land and then another person built the building, and the building was another NFT. And on top of the building, somebody built a billboard and rented out the billboard to corporations. And so then if your building is in a good street and a lot of people walk by seeing the billboard, you can charge higher rents for the virtual billboard, which is amazing. So I think we're going to see some really fun stuff happening there, and I'm really excited about it. And because these virtual lands like really give people the permission to think outside the box of what's possible. And I think we will see things that are just not possible in the real world, and it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really excited about that, actually. Yeah,
I think so too. So it's land is one NFT that has a building on it, which is another NFT that then has a billboard on it, which is the third NFT, and that's all nested within one. That's really cool.
Yeah, Remark is amazing. I think they're like 1 or 2 years ahead of in development to all other NFT platforms that I've seen, and they have gotten some attention, but I think nowhere near the level that they deserve, because I think the technology is amazing.
Yeah, it's
Really
amazing.
great project. Yeah.
So as we're starting to think more about, okay, these games are going to get better, the piece of technology that surround it, something like Remark, that's going to get better, and the metaverse is coming, the metaverse is here, we don't want to miss out. How would you suggest that people, they're experiencing a lot of FOMO right now, there's not like one clear way to play it, to position yourself? What is your recommendation for how people can participate in the metaverse in order to feel like they haven't missed out on this opportunity, knowing that there's so many different ways and it's almost impossible to be like, this is the way to do it?
Mhm.
Maybe we could talk about just some options for people to get started, and maybe take us to the point of where we can sufficiently reduce FOMO to a manageable level.
Yeah. Okay. So I think regarding FOMO, I I I think everybody would do well to realize that we're still early. Like this is probably the early 1990s regarding the web. Like you knew, probably you remember how web pages looked then with this kind of HTML tables, and it's like this is where we are. So take your time. And then personally, the best decisions I've made in crypto have always come from the heart, from a place of joy, and the worst decisions have come from, ooh, yeah, this is so clever, I have to do it, and this like always got me wiped out. And and the other parts where I was like really loving it, that kind of turned out well for me. I mean, of course, this is not investment advice.
Of course. Of course.
So I think that's the way to do it, is to just look at projects and start interacting with projects that you just enjoy, that you think for some whatever reason you like the graphics, you like the story. You've seen a video on YouTube. I think YouTube is an amazing place to dig into that, because you can actually look at the things. People explain it really well usually. And so I think YouTube is a good source for information here. And to just start with whatever piques your fancy. And I think especially now at this moment where Ethereum gas is so low, because like 3 months ago when we started writing the report, I'd say maybe for somebody getting in with that doesn't want to spend a lot of money, stay away from Ethereum, because it's like the gas fees will eat so much into your funds that you won't enjoy interacting with the game. But now this isn't so much of an issue. So I think you can start anywhere that piques your fancy. Personally, I'd say like, what do you want to get out of it? Do you like want to play around with it? Do you like want to build something cool? Because if you want to play, then maybe something like Axie or Bomb Crypto is nice. If you want to build something cool, maybe go into something like Sandbox, or go into something like Decentraland, where you can build cool stuff and you have happenings like in a really virtual city. So that's how I would go about it. But I would really take my time. I think that's crucially important, because when you act from this place of missing out and from, not wanting to get left behind, I think that's a really bad spot to act from, and the results will show that. I'm very certain of that like how you approach it is crucial to the results that you get.
I love that. I really appreciate you coming on today. I think we covered a lot of really good topics, and I'm just so excited for kind of the future of where we're going to go with this industry and the metaverse and everything. I think really only time is going to tell us, what craziness is actually going to happen.
Yeah,
It's
certainly.
a coin flip. I'm curious though, when you think about the metaverse, then, and definitions aside, I think a lot of people kind of get hung up on that, myself included. What are you the most excited about when it comes to just the metaverse and your vision of what it can become? Like, what's your North Star that really drives you to participate in this space?
So I think for me, there's like it's kind of a crossroads, and we are in a really interesting spot at the moment, because I think for me, what's so cool about it is all this tinkering and this decentralization, and that it's so easy for developers, even solo developers or small teams, to spin up a project, get a lot of recognition fast, and I just love that vibe. For me, this is what really attracts me to that space. Like for instance, Splinterlands, this game that we discussed earlier, they have a strict no advertisement policy. All their success is just from word of mouth, and that's so beautiful in a way. And what I'm afraid that might happen, and especially with the announcement of Facebook becoming Meta and Zuckerberg showing his version of the metaverse, is that we see these huge players coming in, and of course they want to control the experience much more, and kind of, and I've seen that with Facebook or with Meta, how they're called now, and I've become a little bit wary about that, because they announced themselves becoming Meta, announced a big metaverse play, and then a month later they retired their stable coin. So I think that's a very concerted push to show regulators, look, we are the sensible choice. We are not these wild bunch of of savages out there who want to destroy the government. So talk to us and make regulation so that it favors us in the end. I think it's a very calculated play on their part. And this is something that I would hate to see when all of a sudden all this regulation creeps in and it gets harder and harder and harder for small developers and small studios to develop applications, because they have to jump through so many regulatory hoops that it just becomes too expensive. And so what I would like to see is this kind of tinkering and this kind of decentralized innovation to keep on going, because I think this is what will create the most value in the fastest possible time, because we will see all of these experiments happening in parallel.
So is it the speed and the lack of a barrier to entry? Do you think that's the most important to this innovation?
Yeah. And also the openness, like everybody talking with everybody else, because just the speed and the lack of barriers of entry could also mean like 100,000 people running in parallel and not talking to each other. And that really wouldn't do. So, but now like we have so much communication happening. And this is where it becomes so interesting, because everybody learns from each other's experiments, right? And
That's
this
right.
is such a beautiful flywheel. And I want to see this flywheel going on and not slowing down and becoming more ossified and kind of. So I think this lack of structure is actually a big plus, even though it's totally chaotic. But it's kind of a kind of primal source of innovation that I love. I just love it. It's really amazing to see.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I completely agree. It's really nice to see a lot of people who otherwise may not have been able to work together now have something to come together and work on, which is this, blockchain, crypto gaming, the metaverse. Yeah, I mean, I've just been blown away by how many freaking smart people have come together and put, everybody's putting their noggins together, and everybody's so nice and cooperative, and everybody answers your emails when you send them most of the time. And it really is awesome. I would hate for us to lose as a community the spirit of that, because for any reason, because of anything. Talking about regulation, and as we get bigger as a community, as a crypto community, we are going to have to tackle that hurdle and tackle that challenge. What do you hope the regulators get right with crypto and blockchain and the metaverse? Like, if you could wave a magic wand and have them set policy how you believe it should be done, like what would you say are kind of the more important points that they have to get right for us to really keep the spirit alive?
Love that question. So I think recently the Biden administration executive order kind of leaked, or I think it was announced, and I think it was a really good push, the way I saw it, that they want, because we need regulation. Like you said, at the moment, I think one of the biggest barriers to adoption of crypto is the lack of regulation. Because if I'm a company and why should I get paid in crypto? The tax implications are so murky, I wouldn't touch it with a stick. So that's hindering me, actually, that's hindering crypto adoption. So I think what regulators should do is just be clear about what they want, what they need actually from the crypto space, and then allow the industry their inputs about how this can be achieved. Because the way I see it, a lot of the crypto industry is actually interested in getting regulated and getting regulated in the right way. And they approach lawmakers proactively. We have seen that like a year ago when all this crypto group worked with Senators Loomis and so on. And I'd love to see that going forward. So if I could wave my magic wand, I would love regulators to be really light-handed, but to be really clear and have it and kind of participate in this kind of iteration that happens, because so much is going to change. And what we see with a lot of regulation is this: as soon as regulation happens, this game of cat and mouse begins, or police and thieves. There's regulation, there's a way to bypass the regulation tightens, so there's another way, and blah 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 blah. And I think this is super frustrating for both sides of the equation. It's frustrating for companies who have to fulfill more and more and more documentary duties, compliance duties, and so on and so forth. And it's frustrating for lawmakers who kind of have to engage in this game of, okay, they found that, now we have to tighten there, and so on. And I think the way out is to stay in this openness and to stay in this dialogue, and not come this temptation to come to this place where it's kind of fire and forget. Like, I make this law now and then I don't have to touch it again for 10 years. I think this is something that will not work for crypto, especially not now, and shouldn't happen. But it should remain this kind of dialogue where lawmakers or regulators are just really clear. They say, like, we want to collect taxes on gains. Okay, sure, of course, you should. We want to have some controls that terrorism and child pornography and so on is not financed. Okay, how can we do that? Because actually, it's not that easy. It's not that easy even with fiat. So maybe, like, how can that work? But engage in a dialogue and be a part of this fast iterating process of innovation. That I think would be very, very, very good for regulators also to get into, because it might inspire them to use other tactics than they used before.
So if I'm hearing correctly, I actually think it's brilliant. It's almost like the regulators decide, okay, what do we want to achieve here? What's our goals? And almost push the responsibility of figuring out how to reach those goals back on us as a crypto community. Let us propose solutions for how to get there, send it back to them. And they're like, okay, this could work. This, we need some more, try again here, so on and so forth, and then send it back to us. Let us fix it up, and then back to them. I guess a question there is, since we're all decentralized and there is a bunch of chaos and there are a bunch of different people, who do the regulators even speak with? Like, what body of humans or projects or entities would come together to form that other side of the conversation with the regulators? How do you who determines that?
Good question. And I think that's like where it gets so sticky, because we've seen that time and again in other industries. Like, I was working for a company that did consulting for car companies and electronics companies. What happens with vehicles or products at the end of life? So after they get recycled, basically. And there's a bunch of regulation, like what needs to happen. For instance, with cars, there's this regulation that says 95% of a car have to be able to be recycled at the end of life. So then regulators said, this is what we want. And the car industry stepped forward and said, like, okay, we're going to help you determine how this is calculated. And this needs to happen for the crypto industry as well. So now the car industry is, of course, heavily centralized. You basically have maybe, I don't know, 12 or so major players that kind of make up the whole industry. And in crypto, it's hundreds. But, and this is the really important point, crypto has an instrument that traditional industries doesn't have, and it's an instrument for reaching consensus. And I think, this is like it makes it really easy. Like people, there can be like a crypto governance DAO, and then people can vote with their shares or whatever. And so I think I don't really have an answer to that, but I would love to see these modes of organizing that we see developing now, like DAOs, and all these wonderful experiments in governance that we are doing, to be applied here, and to really see a departure from this hierarchical form of organizing that we have seen in corporations and governments until now. Because I think that we are, as a society, at a point where the complexity that we face, the challenges that we face, is so high that this hierarchical, centralized form of governance is just too slow. It will lead us into a lot of problems, and we need to become much more agile and quick, and also quicker to coordinate if we want to like tackle these challenges going forward as a society. So this is something I'm actually really excited about in the crypto space, is this kind of, that it kind of gives people the permission to organize in a different way.
Yeah, these are a lot of really good points. Maybe what a takeaway is if we expect regulators to listen to us, we need to prove that we can be organized and effective in a decentralized way. We need to reach consensus together as a crypto community, come together as a crypto community, and show that we have the ability to function at a very high level, to the point where it's a no-brainer to then work with us as to help solve some of these problems, because not doing so would be so painful to the regulators, because they're missing out on so much context and nuance that only we who are within the community could help provide. Maybe that's the solution.
Yeah, sounds really good. I think that way you could totally have sold that. You sold it to me. No,
Awesome.
but I think look at what happened at SushiSwap. Like, it's governed by a distributed autonomous organization, and it has seen so many difficult things happening, but the organization is still thriving. So I think we can see that these organizations are incredibly resilient. And I think that there's a lot of strength there that's not visible at the first glance, and that probably needs to be communicated better. It's not just like a airy-fairy kind of governmental experiment that'll fail sooner or later, but I think it's necessary next step to organizing people.
I think so too. And what's interesting is, I think where we might actually see the grand majority of experiments happen is within games, because each game is going to be a perfect breeding ground for many, many, many of these different experiments, because we'll have the game as a whole. There'll be the greater game community there, and then within the game, there are going to be different factions of players and groups of players that come together. Those could all be DAOs, or some sort of organized group of players coming together. And so you have multiple, within, and then between games, we're going to need like an inter-game alliance at some point, and then there are going to be different types of those. Yeah, that's what I'm really excited to see also, is like, how can we solve problems within the microcosm of games that we can then apply these learnings to everything else. And maybe at the end of the day, games are what saves us.
I would love that. I think as a society we play much too little. I mean, definitely we need more play.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Well, Raphael, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today. I know we're a bit over time here, so I appreciate you sharing your very valuable time. Thank you for all the research that you've done. I know y'all have your report coming out relatively soon, so Maybe you could just give a brief snapshot on what that's going to entail, and then whenever it does come out, I can update some of the links in the description to make sure people can go um, do whatever they need to do to get access to it.
Okay, yeah, thanks. So the GameFi report from Cointelegraph Consulting will come out on Monday, the 14th. And in the report, we kind of look at the history of GameFi. Then we come into how players are making money. And we are comparing 5 top blockchain games that we selected. And then we kind of go into the dark side of GameFi. So regulatory concerns, environmental concerns, what we touched on in our interview about if the dice are loaded, like play to earn versus have to earn. And then we touched the subject of property rights that we discussed in the beginning of this podcast. So I think all in all, it gives you a very interesting overview of the space and the developments inside and like what makes GameFi so special. And it's out on Monday. So yeah.
Awesome. Love that. Love that. Well, again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you, and to everybody who's watching and listening, I want to thank you all. And just want to just say thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All the best and have a great evening.